Jesus is more. Jesus is more. Jesus is more. Jesus is more. Ooh, yeah. Jesus is more than wonderful. And he's more.
Good evening. I'm Jonathan Morrison, the senior minister of the Cedar Crest Church of Christ here in Dallas, Texas, here to welcome you on behalf of the Dallas area preachers and church leaders to the second night of our Justice Conference here in the city of Dallas. Listen, we know that you were blessed by last night's experience as Dr. Blakeney challenged us to live up to our responsibility and to be responsive with regard to the social injustices that we see taking place in America and in our communities today as the people of God. And so we're excited about tonight's continuation of that conversation and this conference. We're excited to have Dr. Jerry Taylor, illustrious evangelist of Churches of Christ, an associate professor of Abilene Christian University, the founder of the Carl Spain Foundation, which deals in very great ways with social injustice, racial unity in America. And so he's one of the leading voices among us in that regard. And we're excited to have him here tonight with those that he has invited to be a part of this very pointed and timely discussion. He'll be leading tonight's discussion entitled Treating the Trauma. And we're having this discussion because we recognize that in light of all that we've seen, especially in the last year or so, beginning with the death of Botham Jean, and not long after that, Tatiana Jefferson. We've seen the recent slayings of Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor, and of course, lately, most late, George Floyd, who was murdered at the hands of a Minneapolis police officer. So we recognize the trauma that we have experienced as a community and as a people and as a nation as a result of what we've seen. Coupled with that, we have the response from police and the protesting, and all of that has impacted us spiritually. It's also impacted us psychologically. And so we've invited a number of very qualified men and women to help us have a discussion and think through the trauma that we've experienced and how we can treat that. And so here in just a moment, I'm going to hand it off to Dr. Taylor, and he's going to begin tonight's discussion. But before we do that, we invite you to like the page for the Dallas area preachers and church leaders. We want you to tag 3 people in this broadcast. We want you to share it, and we even want you to host a watch party. If you're watching via YouTube, we want you to subscribe to this channel, and we want you to make sure you click that notification button to make sure that when we go live, that you don't miss a thing. And so with that said, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Taylor, and we're excited about what he's going to share with us tonight. And once they're done, we're going to come back and we'll close out for the night. God bless.
We are delighted to be with you on this evening, to be a part of this extremely important week, treating subjects that are important to the healthy survival of African Americans as we seek to exist in the land in which we were born, with a tremendous history as a people of having endured an extreme amount of suffering. We celebrate the fact that we have been brought to this point on the journey by the God who is known as the God of liberation, the same God who sent Moses into Egypt to set the captives free and to relieve them from their oppression under the foot of Egyptian domination. And so we today, as a people living in the United States of America, we still face a similar position of oppression. But the same God who existed back then is the same God of the right now moment. And so we come to you as a panelist that will be talking about the subject of treating the trauma, being aware of how we have been wounded as a people, and also talking together in the context of love and talking about ways that we can experience healing from the trauma that we have experienced as a people who have been opposed and oppressed by the spirit of white supremacy that has long existed in this country. And as we see today, it is still alive and well. We have been blessed to assemble a host of folks here that will be talking about this issue of treating the trauma. And I'd like to ask them to take a few minutes to introduce themselves. And we will begin with Dr. Candy Owens.
Hi, thanks so much, Doc. It's super good to be here, and I'm just grateful for the invitation to talk about treating trauma. My name is Arkandra Owens, but I go by Candy Owens, and I am a licensed psychologist out of Memphis, Tennessee. I work at a small liberal arts college at this point, and am the associate director of their student counseling center. And also am a supervisor of future psychologists and social workers and counselors, as well as the group services coordinator. So I do a lot of work with racial trauma in particular. I go into organizations and to universities to talk about processing racial trauma in white spaces. And so that's kind of where my passion is, and kind of what I want to do with my life is to help our people, but also help our oppressors as well to not be oppressive anymore, and to really do the work to engage in our healing as well as their own. And to that end, I'm also someone who is trying to get out there on social media as well. And so I have an Instagram called Healing Black Narratives, and it is my first venture into the social media world to try and bring some of these messages to a greater audience, because what I do a lot is individual therapy inside the therapy room, and my reach is great there, which I attribute only to God. But I also hope to make some of this work more accessible to other people as well. And so that's why I've ventured into that medium as well. So thanks again for letting me be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Candy. We are so grateful to have you as a part of this panelist today. This panel, we really appreciate it. We've been blessed by your work as we had our African American Leadership Summit in Memphis, and you did an outstanding, excellent job, and we know that God will continue to use you in this venue today. Our next panelist is Dr. Lawrence Murray, and we will ask him if he would introduce himself at this time.
Again, thank you so much, Dr. Taylor, and I'm also honored to be on this platform in healing trauma. I have been in the field for now over 20 years. It's interesting that I say that, and unlike the capable Dr. Owens, I divide my time from the room, whether doing groups or individual work, not necessarily with trauma in a sense with African American bodies, but more or less with PTSD with troops, Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines. And sometimes they will be African American. I've been teaching psychology, all aspects of psychology, abnormal, physiological, of course, the general psychology, to Oklahoma Christian University here in Oklahoma. And it was a great experience. However, I did teach in a predominantly white institution as an African American male professor in the psychology department, which makes it interesting. But now for the past 2 years, I serve humbly at Langston University, upon which I am able to weave in an African American perspective within the context of psychology. And maybe we may explore that, but looking at our individual behavior within the context of those social and contextual factors that are unique to us, inclusive of some of those responses that are stereotypically judged, and we'll talk about that, and then how do we respond. And then not only that, I serve as minister to the Way Community Church of Christ, and it is there that even though I don't treat individually members of the church, I primarily refer them, but we do have to work within what I would call a socio-cultural context of understanding their different issues. And I'm quite sure, hopefully we'll explore that as we look at perhaps the Western style of psychology as opposed to the African-American bent of psychology and what that means to our people, especially since we dwell in a situation of trauma at all times. Lastly, therein lies my quest, and now really my dream to be at Langston University, HBCU, where I can at least serve as a mentor and provide some sense of hope in that now as a middle-aged person and faith person, that if we keep on speaking and keep on heralding the unique difference that we are, I think people would see our individual psyche and respond to us as normal and not abnormal.
Thank you, Dr. Murray. We are really grateful to have you with us also on the panel. Of course, we've been knowing each other for quite some time now, since the 1980s, which seemed a long time ago, but so grateful to be blessed to be serving with you in this way. Our next guest is Dr. Alvin Curette, and we'll allow him to introduce himself.
So Dr. Taylor, thank you for the invitation. I too am honored to be a part of this conversation. Currently, I am an adjunct professor at the University of Texas at San Antonio. I teach classes in educational leadership and policy studies, but I've also taught in African American studies and classes that are involved with our first year undergraduate program. My background is in student affairs, so human relations. I have been fortunate to work with students from diverse backgrounds in housing, student conduct, leadership development, and what's dear to my heart is critical race studies within education, primarily Black student leadership. I take it as an honor to help students, Black students, navigate their own internal sort of psychological barriers that have been, I don't want to say created solely, but certainly racism and white supremacist ideologies have contributed to their own internal psychological and emotional struggles, and also helping Black students think about and learn how to navigate white spaces. And so again, thank you for the opportunity to be here and join the conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Curette. Of course, we've been knowing you since you were about 8 or 9 years old, out of the Thomas Boulevard Church of Christ in Port Arthur, Texas. And to see how God is just using you in a mighty way, it brings joy to the heart.
Thank you.
Our next guest is Joshua Jackson, who is the minister of the Rural Hill Church of Christ. And we had an event on yesterday dealing with police reform. And Joshua did such a masterful job in facilitating that conversation that I have asked him if he would lead us in this discussion here in this event that we're doing. And he is very gifted and extremely bright and just a great preacher and a great facilitator. So I'm going to ask him to introduce himself, and then he'll lead us as a panel from there. Josh.
Oh, well, thank you, Doc. Honestly, I'm always honored and grateful to Do anything you ask me to do, honestly. I hold you in high regard, and I know that a lot of the places I've been and things I've been able to do is because you have laid the path for me, and I'm so grateful and so thankful. And so, like Doc said, my name is Joshua Jackson. I am the minister here at the Rural Hill Church of Christ in Antioch, Tennessee, outside of Nashville. Part of what I focus on is I actually intentionally choose to be in racially diverse spaces as a minister, specifically to have conversations such as this. I made it my mission, my wife and I made it our mission to minister in contexts where we were not going to be a part of the dominant group, specifically because if racial healing and racial unity and these conversations are going to happen, it needs to happen in spaces where people don't know what's actually going on. And so I enjoy doing this. I feel blessed to be a part of this conversation. And I'm excited about our conversation that we're going to have, because I think there's going to be a lot of good information, but a lot of impactful revelation. And so with that, I want us to start just on the basis of kind of describing or actually naming something and defining it. And so when we talk about trauma, because this is about treating the trauma, what is trauma? And what I mean when I say that, it's easy to identify when someone's had physical trauma because you see the impact of it. You know, you get in a car accident, you see the physical trauma. You can show pictures of it. You can talk about the experience. But that's not all there is to trauma. A lot of trauma can go in microaggressions. They can be unseen trauma. You can have trauma that you didn't know was actually trauma until something happens that triggers the expression of the trauma. So kind of talk to us and kind of let the audience know when we're talking about treating trauma, especially for people who are like us, Black people and communities of color, what exactly does that look like in a holistic approach or a well-rounded approach?
Well, I guess I'll take a stab at it. I believe that whenever an oppressor seeks to dominate or to destroy a people, the first area of attack is that of the spirit. You cannot bend the body unless you first break the spirit. Mm-hmm. And I think that the African spirit that was brought here at the beginning of enslavement was intentionally broken. And that brokenness has a residual effect that comes down to us to this day. And so the trauma in the spiritual sense of the word is invisible, though it expresses itself and reveals itself in practical, concrete ways. And so those who have broken the African spirit in this country somehow seems as if they are shocked when they see young men killing each other in South Chicago and in other urban areas, and they can't figure that out. So I think that when you break the spirit of the people and then you miseducate that spirit by binding upon them a false religion that claims to be Christian, when in fact it is a religion about race and white supremacy, and then you miseducate them in your school system, and so you've dehumanized them, broken them to the level of being what you would consider an animal, and then you ask how come they can act like human beings. Well, you created them to act as they're acting today. And so that would be my immediate response to how we as an African people have had our spirit mutilated, broken into a trillion pieces, and we're still staggering in the darkness trying to figure out how to pick up the broken pieces, while those who have broken us are standing over us, asking us, how did this happen?
And Josh, just a great question, man. And Jerry, very powerful. As I sat there, really no more to add to that, but I'm quite sure there is with the others. But when you think about it, we still step back from the word trauma and keep in lens what you shared and not lose it. But then think about it, when most people will perhaps look and listen to us, they're going to think, well, look, trauma usually happens to a person and we see it, and we can talk about what's acute as opposed to what's post and then that stressor. But here's the thing, it's a belief system as well, Dr. Taylor, like you shared. And I think what people need to see, that belief of this cognitive distortion that you always live with. So you have to look through everything that you experience in your community is through the lens of, I may not measure up. The system was already set. So there's a belief system that perpetuates that. And so Ray, interestingly, the trauma, and I'm not necessarily justifying this, but the trauma translates to rage in terms of dealing with it, because there are no other outlets. If we act communal, then the foot and knee is still on our neck, even if we comply, if we are still. So it's even being seen. And I don't want to widen the scope, but we've now acquiesced to this idea that if I see the episodes of Cops, I think they took it off, but there were a lot of episodes of police shows showing not microaggressions, but physical aggression.
Yes.
Which in my sense sends a belief to a white system that's already empowered that if I can physically aggress, then my microaggressions will really. And so it's kind of double layered, where this new Jim Crowism is a response so as not to be traumatized again. Because when you give your child the talk, when I give my daughters a talk, it's literally saying that there's a built-in trauma. And so when you do this, do this.
Right.
It's built in that your Black body is traumatizing.
Ooh.
You are literally traumatizing, and a kid does not know how to process that. And so anyway, I'll jump out there. So there's a lot to consider, Jerry, as you really set that foundation from Josh's question. Just awesome.
Oh wow, man, you said a lot. And so I want to let me piggyback on some of those things and kind of let's take another step in this, because you said it is multi-layered, and it is. So when you're talking about, this brokenness and these pieces that are fractured from an individual, so part of the responsibility or part of the role that we're doing in terms of this healing from trauma is recognizing that we need to put people back together, right?
Yeah.
But what do you do to people, especially for our community, who don't know how broken they are? They've never had the space to actually think about why we do what we do. Why do I respond the way I respond? Why is this my action? Why do I perceive what I perceive? I don't know that I'm traumatized because nothing physically necessarily has happened to me, but I've grown up in a conditioning system that has traumatized me in order for me to survive in a white space or in a white world. So what are some steps that we can take to help our people to recognize that even if you can't physically see the trauma, we're acting out of our trauma?
I think that one's such a big question, because sometimes I've noticed a lot in my work that people don't realize it until there's somebody there that helps them name it. And so I think the act of naming, the act of validating, the act of allowing people to share deeply always puts up a mirror, you know, a reflection to another person about what's happening for them. Often when I talk about racial trauma, you know, it's definitely like I say, okay, it's, you know, the physical and the psychological impact of experiencing racism. I mean, that's really, you know, concise, but it's such a huge concept. And so sometimes that's not helpful as much, but I do try and reiterate that because, as other people are saying, you live in your Black body and you live in this white world. There is consistent experiences of trauma happening. It's not a matter of if it's happening, it's really a matter of naming that it is happening, and it's happening often, and actually this is the backdrop upon which we live our lives, our everyday lives. And so usually what's helpful sometimes is to also name, you know, when people are experiencing trauma, these are some of the ways that it comes out. And so then I take people through just this multidimensional discussion about how trauma presents itself. You know, when we think about the physical ways that it presents itself, we talk about aches and pains. We talk about tension. We talk about just how people hold their stress. We also talk about mental and emotional, like often there is rage, often there is depression and anxiety. Sometimes we can't concentrate. Sometimes when we walk into white spaces, we lose our words. We don't even know. We can't even put our words out there. We can't even encode memories because we're in such a active and reactive space that we can't be our best. We can't reach our full potential because we're trying to just survive in that moment. Like there's no such thing as thriving often in situations and contexts where trauma is the background. We look at it spiritually as well, you know, just this knowledge that we've been presented by white saviors, a white Jesus, a white church, you know, that the rhetoric of enslavement was that the Black person was indentured to white people, that they were going to save their souls as long as they were good slaves, and they did their best to serve their earthly masters, and which really was a call to serve at all cost whiteness and white supremacy. And then we also look at the medical experiences, the excuse me, the hypertension, the cardiovascular issues. I talk a lot about that the stress and the trauma that manifests itself in our bodies is often contributing so much to our even the very pathways of our blood is being changed in the body. Like it's our breath isn't as deep, you know, the vessels that carry our blood are often blocked, and it's not because we're eating bad necessarily or anything like that. It's because of the stress of trauma. And so this also impacts higher cancer rates, fertility issues, particularly in Black women. And so, you know, there's so many domains. And so sometimes it's so helpful just to say, hey, this is how trauma shows up. And then also to name it as such, that we actually are impacted by racism. And it's not that this is our imagination. It's not because we're crazy or we're not, you know, enough, or we're not worthy, or we're not valuable. It's because we're living in a society that was not meant for us, at least not for us to be human, at least not for us to be successful, or to be fully who we are. This society was meant to oppress and kill, and not just the body, as Dr. Taylor was saying, Dr. Murray was saying, you know, it was to kill the spirit. It was to take from us, you know, our calling and our purpose in life, and to make it about our oppressors rather than about God. So those are some of the things that I would share.
All right, Alvin, I see you got that look. Go ahead, because we're going to unpack a lot of that. Thank you, Sister Candy. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So I just want to put a face to it. I want to put a face to it. So you're looking at someone who is still dealing with being racially traumatized. It wasn't until maybe 2.5 years ago that I realized that what I had considered to be a normal state for me, that it was not a relaxed state. I thought that I knew what feeling relaxed meant. And 2.5 years ago, I got a job working in academia. And I realized that I would be working with colleagues who were predominantly white males. And the moment that I walked into that room, the years of trauma that had built up in me really caused me to question everything about myself. As Dr. Murray said, I started to immediately question whether I was good enough, intelligent enough. Thoughts of being an imposter really kicked in because I started to have self-deprecating thoughts of if I stay here long enough, they're gonna figure out that I'm not as smart or as intelligent as they think I am. And that moment, I thank God for it, because that moment, it prompted me to do some serious soul searching about how I had arrived at that point. Most people looked at me and they thought I had it all together. Doctorate, accolades. On the outside, I looked the part. But for years, I had been suffering from episodes of anxiety, depression. But people really didn't know it unless I allowed them in. And when I traced it back, I had to be honest with myself. My community, Black community, they were operating out of what they thought was love. They taught me that in order to make it in this white world, that I had to be perfect. That I had to be, you can put a number by it, but I had to be so much better than my white counterparts. That perfection was the only thing that would allow me to really compete. And I carried this for years from grade school. And that contributed to me having some social anxiety, being afraid to be critiqued or judged. I would take those things personal, particularly when it came from white professors and white authority. And so you can imagine years later, we talk about being fragmented. I use this illustration. The self-doubt had gotten so bad to where I felt like a glass pitcher that was resting upon the palm of someone, and they just removed it, and I hit the ground and shattered. And thanks to God, I've been able to name it, and I have been able to, through His grace, His mercy, and His power, I've been able to heal and continue that healing process, because what I had done, I had built myself up. I built this illusion up that I alone could make myself acceptable in the eyes of white people. And so degrees, the way I dressed, the way I spoke, the way I wrote, I was trying to do those things under my own power to make myself or show myself as acceptable. And what I realized was that I could not justify myself, because to some, I was just Black. And so I had pushed God to the side, because I rejected who God created me to be. And I tried to make white institutions and white folks my God by trying to seek their approval as opposed to the one who created me.
Oh man, this is a good conversation right here now. Yeah. Oh boy, we might be able to sell this for some real money right here. We gonna change some real lives over here now. Y'all doing a lot. Okay, we got to build off of two things. One that Sister Candy said, and thank you, Alvin, for your transparency and being able to put that face to it, like you said, and telling your story. And something you said in this, where you talked about being in these white spaces and having to do the deep work for yourself and having to go back and look at the images. You started talking about seeing myself, and something that Sister Candy brought up, this image of the white Jesus. because part of what continues the trauma are the images and depictions that we show. And so I had to think back even to my elementary school days. I don't know about you, but I remember being in kindergarten, you know, they got the ABC little track thing all the way around the wall, right? And next to it, they show something that represents all these images. And so when I started looking back and I think through, so when they show you it, you know, you get to pee and there's a police officer, it's a white man. When you look at the lawyer, the doctor, it's always a white person. So what are those images helping to reinforce, and what are they saying to people of color in those spaces? That if every authority figure looks like somebody in white skin, if all the depictions of people in authority or power in this society are always depicted as people in white skin, when I watch movies and TV shows, if the villain is always wearing dark clothing or always a black person or a person of color, and the savior is always somebody in light colors or in white clothing or a white person, how are these traumatic things happening that we're just completely oblivious to and we're unaware of, and we're consuming this information, these images? And like you said, even with the white Jesus, we kind of take it for granted, but it's not just saying that Jesus possibly was white for what they're trying to display, but it actually does something psychologically to us. It has an impact on us that we might not even viscerally just connect with. And so I want us to talk about how these images play into keeping this dominant structure, but also how they play into the trauma of us as Black people in America.
Well, if you don't mind, let me comment on this, because man, this is so developmental in the sense that it already perpetuates what our brother said, that he has to appeal to whiteness. It was already ingrained that they set the standard, like you said, Josh, the police officer, the lawyer. And, you know, interestingly, and Dr. Owens will speak a lot more to this in terms of just treating people of color with trauma. You really have to have, like, you know, Candy would be a culturally sensitive, socially aware therapist, right? But that's saying a lot, not backing away from the question, because think about it. The stigmata of trauma for most African Americans, they're not going to go to treatment because of this stigmata of mental health, the idea of distrust. And so it really has to go all the way back, Josh, in my opinion, to this intergenerational trauma that we're talking about should be included in education when teaching history, in particular, Black history. If we really want to look at it all the way from preschool, the mindset that we do make a difference, because some of you said it, it's already ingrained that we're not enough. It's already ingrained that we're not enough. And right now, we still need to be careful. I'm proud of Jay-Z, I'm proud of Oprah, I'm proud of Tyler Perry, but they're still struggling with Black intellectuals. Black intellectual women who are extremely powerful and strong, because they have to deal with the twin agony of course, female, and then a Black female who is only deemed as a physical body to be buked and scorned, like Sarah Barton was in history in slave trades. And the way they even see women and men. And I just have to take it there, because so we want to jump high. We want to fall into the roles where we see most of the Black people getting the money, having the influence. But then at the end of the day, it seems as if white master is still riding on his horse, because we're still on the slave block being sold for how good we look, how well we speak, how well we can influence. But then the conversations with the four of you and other intellectuals are rarely heard, because, you know, we sound too good. And I just literally believe that they made the first mistake by letting us read, and they still don't want to read. So again, that's our greatest weapon. And so we have to educate our children, but especially Afrocentric education, to not be afraid of who you are and reinforce self-hatred by not even wanting to know who you are, because we think we already know. Anyway.
No, I want to say something about that, because I think you brought up a really important point that it hit me when you were talking. I remember being in history class. You know, they're teaching American history. And so for me, I was in predominantly white spaces all of my primary academic schooling time. And so what that looked like was, you know, the teacher's white, you know, most of my classmates are white. But when they start talking about history and you're looking through this history book at the pictures, well, besides a picture of Frederick Douglass or Martin Luther King, most of the other time you're looking at slaves or somebody who's lynched. And so I'm the one Black person or the few Black people in a predominantly white space. And every other picture is a white man who's doing something, who's conquered something, who's in charge of something. And they talk great about them. But then we're going to talk about the Civil War and you see Black bodies. Or we're going to talk about slavery and you see the slave block. And so it's like, so then I build this inferiority complex. But also having to be the only Black person or the few Black people in this space with a white teacher and the rest of my classmates are white, everybody's looking at me now like, oh, don't seem like that's a good place to be, is to be Black in this country. But what do you say? What do you do with that? You just basically have to internalize that.
Yeah.
And like our brother Alvin was saying, you keep going. And so it might not come up immediately. The trigger might not happen immediately, but like Doc was talking about in the opening speech, that does something to the spirit of an individual. That rage, that anger, those emotions that you feel when you see that picture, and they're talking about this historical event, and you know that had you been born in that time, that would have been you, and the rest of your white classmates would have been on the other side of this. You feel some kind of way in that moment, but who do you talk to? Who do you say something to?
May I mention something? Oh, this is so unrehearsed. I hope this doesn't go. Y'all have to save me on this. But you know, even when we think of religion and the subjugation of Black people, and it's such a true story when we look at Simon the Cyrene. Now, Jesus has gone to the cross. We're already talking about white Jesus. And so some people have the mental picture. And they're almost like the Roman soldier in modern day times, because, you know, Jesus is going to the cross, and then the soldier compelled Simon, hey, you, because that was kind of the law. You can compel anybody to carry the cross. There's some Black who are still enslaved, even in their idea of the salvific and salvation element of Christ, because Simon the Cyrene, a Black man, had to carry the cross. So they still see themselves lower at the cross.
Right.
and then that's the place where you kind of first saw the light. That's what the song says. So again, when I think of it, I didn't mean to go that direction, but I do know some people within religion, Josh, as we widen that lens even more, that associate their salvation no greater than a Cyrene, and they probably don't even believe that they're saved on the same rung as somebody else.
Yeah. Let me make this comment. In the United States, the God that rules this country is not the God of Jesus, Moses, or Jacob. It is the idol God of whiteness. White supremacy is the idol God of America. That anybody who is born here or brought here, they are expected to bow down in reverent worship of the idol God of whiteness. And if you tear down the statues that have been built out of reverence for the Confederate South, that is equivalent to taking cans of spray paint and spraying it and desecrating the worship houses in this country. And so the reason why people are so upset with the tearing down of these statues and these monuments is because they symbolize the true spirit of the true God of this country that even governs those groups that call themselves churches. That is America's God, is white supremacy. And anybody who tampers with that will be accused of committing blasphemy and not believing in America and in America's God. And so until we address that at the very core, we might be having a whole lot of religion, but we won't have Jesus with that. Not the biblical Jesus.
That blonde hair, blue eyed guy that looked like he was working out on the cross.
That's right.
Go ahead, Brother Alvin. I saw you there.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say something really quickly. So as I started to unpack sort of my thinking, like one of the things that I struggled with for years is I thought that God had been so good to me. I didn't have to look for scholarships. I didn't have to look for jobs. I mean, like I really thought that God undeservingly had been so good to me only to be setting me up for failure. I thought that God was sort of being so good, but it was going to be inevitable that at some point he was going to sort of take his goodness away. And as I journaled about why I thought that, it's because I could only see God as a white man. And because I have distrust for white male authority figures, on a subconscious level, I had a fake relationship with the creator of heaven and earth. I was praising and worshiping this white supremacist sort of idea of who the American God, right, is. And so there was no way that I could fully trust that image, because everybody in authority that I saw with that type of power, at some point, they would fail me. And so I had to rearrange my own relationship with the one true God, and not this version of God that I had been socialized and conditioned to bow down to for years.
So let me connect something, because, oh man, thank you for saying what you said, and thank you, Doc, for saying that. And let me tie this back to what we've been talking about, is that oftentimes, like I said, we look at trauma as an experience or as an individual event, but we have been socialized, like our sister Candy was saying in the beginning, in trauma, to the point that our trauma is almost feels like this is just life. Mm-hmm. Being traumatized is just what you have to put up with or what you have to deal with. And so in that, how do we begin to help Black people? How do we begin to actually step into healing? And what does that actually look like? How will we begin to know that we're making progress? And I say that against the backdrop of something our brother, Dr. Murray, put out. That is not our natural inclination. There is this stigmata in communities of color, especially in our Black communities. You know, I got Jesus, I got prayer, he gonna get me through. And it's like, yeah, Jesus can get you through, but Jesus also allowed there to be psychologists and therapists, and we need to be talking to people. We need to be working on ourselves. Just putting it all at the feet of the altar and not doing any personal work is not enough. And what you put at the altar might not be all that needs to go there unless you do the work. So how do we begin to encourage communities of color to actually get the help that we need to actually begin to be whole?
Yeah, I think as as a psychologist, I definitely feel that this is a really important question, and something that I'm still working through myself. So what's always interesting, being a Black therapist trying to treat racial trauma, it is difficult to do so when you're experiencing racial trauma yourself. And so it's an interesting, interesting is a loaded word too, but it's a, you know, it's an interesting place to find yourself in. Like, how do I treat something that I'm still in process myself, trying to treat myself too? And so I do think it's important to talk about therapy. There is a lot of stigma, of course, about it, because again, therapy is another space where Black people were not meant to be in. And it was also a science, and in some ways a pseudoscience that really excluded Black psyches and Black minds, and prioritized white minds and white psyches. And so there's still a lot of places where our field is not getting it right. And so I want to make sure and say that very plainly, because I don't also want to invite anybody who may be hearing this to believe that this system that is therapy, that is psychology, counseling, social work, all of those things, doesn't have its stuff too that, you know, needs to be decolonized as well. But I do think I would share, you know, a lot of what the issue is, you know, can be traced back to enslavement as well. You know, just that we have been socialized to not speak up, because if you speak up and you share your experience authentically, then that could cost you your life. We've been you know, socialized to feel like we have to prove that racism and racist things are happening. And so why would we enter into a therapy room where we'd have to do the work of providing evidence rather than doing the work of healing? And so that's problematic as well. And, you know, going back to the very beginning when we talked about fragmentation, that happens in the mind, you know, in the body and the spirit as well. And so we've also been socialized to be disconnected, because who wants to feel the pain of trauma day in and day out? And the fact is, again, that we are being traumatized daily, moment to moment. As you said, Joshua, that, you know, just being in our Black skin is traumatizing. And so, especially in the background of whiteness and white supremacy, and that idol that Doc was talking about. And so in therapy, there is the intention, at least the way that I do therapy, of integrating the mind, body, and spirit again. And that is hard work, and that can be really painful work when you think of what that could include for Black people. When we think about the psychological residuals of enslavement, all the way up till this point where we're watching a man die in front of us while being recorded. So I just want to say all that because there are ways that we are actively living out our psychology as we avoid going to therapy, as we avoid, you know, prioritizing our mental health and even our self-care. The fact of the matter is that a lot of people of color in our communities of color don't take care of themselves. And that's not because, again, like we're incapable or incompetent at that. It's just that sometimes that feels like a luxury, especially when you're in survival mode all the time. And so when we're in survival mode, there's not the impetus to rest, right? Or to deeply consider your own healing and soothing and self-care, because you're constantly trying to just live. And so I think therapy is a really important method of self-healing, especially when you find the right therapist. And also, you know, again, what's hard is that our fields are dominated by white faces as well. And so it's sometimes hard, and I hear this from a lot of clients, to find people of color to go in and to speak with. And so, but again, you know, therapy is really important. It's important to sit and have your voice be heard. So much of trauma is experiences of being powerless and silenced and suppressed. And so therapy actually works to immediately challenge those things. And so the expression especially for people of color. When we express things, that is healing in and of itself, because our usual tendency is to internalize and to pack it away inside of our bodies. And trauma lives in the body, and it's expressed through the body as well. And so particularly for people of color who are experiencing trauma, it's so important to express what's going on for you. And so therapy is one avenue that's really helpful in that.
Yes, yes. Were you going to say something, Dr. Burry?
You know what? Yeah, I mean, she's really exhausted in what she spoke about, and just to echo the physiological aspects of it, and Dr. Owens mentioned it earlier, that those sympathetic and parasympathetic systems, that naturally goes on. It goes on all the time. And so, unfortunately, we've become used to something that's breaking us down. This term, psychoimmunology, you know, and may I say though, that whole idea of Western psychology is what we, and I think when, as all of us listen to Dr. Owens, and of course, she's probably a master at creating a safe place for people, because you have to create a safe place in therapy in general, but in particular for our people, a lot of the psychological systems and should I say techniques that are implemented are from a Western base. And so, you know, I teach all those courses, by the way, counseling and counseling techniques. And so I'm kind of glad to use part of my time for therapy when I do get back in the room, because it can be exhausting dealing with yourself and who you are. And like some said, we serve masterfully as the only ones. And who is there for us to literally talk out our issues? Fortunately, you know, psychologists and therapists we can consult with each other, you know, and that's the good base that we have. But let me just say this, you know, African psychology and therapy should, and at least I try to do this even when referring, just say, hey, look, there's this subjective approach that it can consider your socio-cultural context. That's kind of what I'm saying. It's kind of saying the same thing. So for example, when I was living in Los Angeles and I was strictly in clinical services, there were Hispanics that'll go see a curandero. And we'll go see a curandero because that was a person in the community, and that's who they'll go to. They'll be less prone to see a psychologist. When I went on my mission trips to Ethiopia and went in the most remotest parts of Africa, there in Addis Ababa, they would see the witch doctor or the village elder. And it was there that, as we talk about therapy, a safe place was created according to their cultural, their beliefs and values, and those things passed down from generation to generation. On this, Josh, unfortunately, those of us in this Western, we've even been handed down, and Candy, you know this psychological construct that is very white. So all of the theories, whether you're doing cognitive behavioral therapy for Black folk, whether you're doing other modes of therapy for Black folk, they don't necessarily fit in the cultural base. And so I'm just echoing what Dr. Owens says. It takes extra work. Not only do you have to lower the stigmata, but then you don't want to borrow European systems and white enslavement systems and then attach them around the emotional behavioral neck of a person. And then that's what it seems like to me. And that was probably a bad use of words, but that's kind of how I see it when a person is looking cognitively at who they are and trying to reconcile the fact. And then last thing, symptomology does not necessarily mean that there's a full diagnosis. And so,
say more about that.
Some of us manifest depression because, yes, we're depressed. And Dr. Felder said it, you know, I'm the same way he is. I appreciate his disclosure. When I was serving at Oklahoma Christian, I'm just going to say this. I was teaching in front of students, and I was the first Black male that they've ever encountered. And after 8 weeks, I saw some of them disparage me with their body posture. I'm not going to give way to this Black man. The questions posed, they would say something like this. Well, in the book it said, and then I had to wisely state, well, this is this edition, and this is that edition, and this is this, and let them know that they were only reading in bold and there are italicized words. But it's interesting. There will always be this doubt in the classroom, and there would be a section of students that would send the message that, you know what, I don't know if we're going to receive this from him. And so when that goes on, I'm just going to say, being very confessional, it may bless somebody. This land of uncertainty in academia as a Black professional, male and female. I don't want to call her name. She was a math teacher at Oklahoma Christian, and it was just the two of us, and we always had to look at each other while we were in white spaces from a distance, recognizing our Blackness, but not trying to appear too strong. Because if we brought our intellect together, she was good at math and other types of things, and then for some strange reason, in a room of whiteness, someone would always come to us and say, wow, you two are really talking. I'm like, well, out of hundreds of people talking and subgrouping, you only see the only two in the room. So it kind of reinforces, it's traumatizing to, and this is why I'm gonna just say this, and I hope it just sends a ruffle in somebody. Black people don't even speak to each other because of this madness. It's right. Real. It's a self-hatred, afraid to acknowledge each other in Black spaces because we're traumatized that if we are recognizing each other, and then massa might say, too much grouping. And I think that has been reinforced. Somebody says, you are ridiculous. That's a shame. No, it is ingrained. So I may see Joshua somewhere in Malibu where I used to go to Pepperdine, and we may be at the store at Hughes below there where all the people shop. And I might see Joshua on aisle 8, but Joshua, I may have to walk by you and just kind of give you the nod, not necessarily say, hey, what's up, brother? How you doing? Because our Blackness might be a threat into the entire city in that store.
No,
I'm sorry, I went off because I'm dealing with my own trauma.
No, you said the truth. No, thank you. And I want us to build on this. And so, Alvin, give me a second. I'm going to pass this to you because I want to help. I want you to help us to live into something. And so when we met earlier, just kind of talking through this, I mentioned about an experience that my wife had. So we were at church. My wife was wearing her natural hair, and this lady just came up and just, white lady, older white lady, and just put her hands all in my wife's hair. My wife's a Black lady, and so y'all already know you just don't put your hand in a Black woman's hair, first of all. But then when my wife said to her, could you not do that? She just reached out and was touching it again, and she was like, I just can't help it. And like, to see the look on my wife's face, because in that moment, even though my wife didn't say it, she didn't have to say it. I knew exactly what she was like. You really don't value me enough, or you don't see us as equals. I don't have personal agency to take care of myself and for you to respect me. The fact that you feel comfortable enough, even after I've asked you not to, the fact that you just didn't ask in the first place and you can just do it, says something. But then after I say something to you and you feel comfortable enough to do it again, that says something about the superiority in which you believe that you have over me. And so I believe that something about how we've been conditioned as people of color, as Black people in this nation, because of white supremacy, that a lot of times, like you were saying, we're afraid to speak up. We're afraid to do these things because we don't feel we have any agency. And the fact that I'm in this space is because, like you said, Master has been good to me. He's allowed me to be here. I should be grateful, right? I don't want to mess this up. And so a reason why I'm putting this out, because Alvin, what I want you to kind of help us to see is that this is also played into how we view one another. because the color line, even within Black communities, how light we are, how dark we are, also contributes to our personal agency or the lack thereof. We reinforce what the white community has done to us, to each other, which adds to another layer of trauma. And so if you can kind of talk through that and kind of help us to see this, I think it'd be helpful for a lot of us.
Thank you, Brother Josh. So my last name is Curette. That's a French name. My wife, she always reminds me that I have privilege because I can trace my family name back to France. There's a region of France named Curette. Rideau is also a part of my family lineage. There are parts of France, there are castles in France with the name Rideau. And the list goes on. And so I'm often reminded to tell my white brothers and sisters whom I love that if we did a test, a blood test, perhaps I have more European blood running through my veins than some of my racially white brothers and sisters. And as it pertains to your question, Josh, this idea of colorism has, and when I call it an idea, I'll say this, the manifestation of colorism, it's created some hurt, some pain within my family. And sometimes as Black people, we don't want to talk about our own ideologies around hues of color, our own beliefs and thinking about aesthetics, from hair texture to darkness and light skin. We don't want to talk about that, particularly in the midst of white people. And what I always want to make sure that my brothers and sisters understand is that we did not just wake up and start to judge each other and create this social hierarchy of color in and of ourselves. Colorism is birthed out of, it is the child of racism. It's the child of racism. And if we do our homework, we can see that there are psychological and material benefits that our ancestors sort of got from being more closely associated with white. And so whether it's the brown paper bag test, whether it was the different ratios of how much Black blood you were presumed to have over white blood, there were material benefits associated with being closer or more closely positioned to being white. But at the end of the day, no matter how hard we continue to try to manipulate our eye colors to blue and green and gray, or to get our hair texture to be straighter, or to make sure that not just light but white, no matter what we try, at the end of the day, we're still Black. And if we go back through history, whether it was Susie Guillory Phipps, right, we can see examples of people who once white society saw that they were making too much progress, getting too much access into organizations and communities, into loans, etc. If their race was questioned, they were quickly reminded that they were Black. And so I think at the end of the day, what pains me, Josh, and I'll wrap up, is that in some of our families across this great nation, when we come together for holidays and we sit around the dinner table, we can laugh and smile and joke, but at some point in time, some of us can't wait to leave, or we flee, because we know that the longer we commune, we can't just talk about things that we enjoy, but some of the pains in terms of how some of our family members were treated differently because they were darker, how some of them had nicknames because they were darker, about how some of them were made to feel and know. They were made to know consistently that they were different than because they were darker. Those feelings when you are 40, 50, 60 years old don't just go away. The trauma lasts. And so once you've eaten the turkey and you've watched the football game and you've talked about how the kids are doing, when you see a commercial or when you see a picture of white Jesus, those feelings come back, and then you look at each other, but sometimes we would prefer to leave early than to really talk about the hurt and the pain that continues to exist, and even consider how we're going to raise our kids who grow up in these families where colorism is a real thing. How do I raise my daughter who is my complexion to love and view her mom as beautiful, who is darker than we are, who has a different hair texture? How do we raise her to view Blackness and all the variety within Blackness as beautiful and gorgeous and intelligent? The last thing I'm gonna say, Josh, I'm gonna say this.
No, keep going, you good.
The last thing I'll say. Because in academia, we have to recognize this. And we see it, like I tell my students, when we see brothers, black bodies getting killed in the streets, most times they don't look like me. I have a certain degree of privilege being a lighter brother. And it's not saying that I don't have some risk. But even in the classroom, when we look at science, most of my white counterparts would say that my European blood, it compensates for my black blood. Therefore, even in a classroom, perhaps they would be more likely to listen to me than someone who is of the hue of Dr. Murray. Because that superior white blood is able to cleanse, like that Jesus is able to cleanse my impurities, right, that have been produced by my dark blood. And so this stuff runs very, very deep, right? But we have to quit blaming ourselves for the origin of it, because it's birthed out of racism. Yeah. But we do have to take responsibility to have some difficult conversations about how we're going to stop this cycle of colorism that continues to kill our families and our community.
Yes, thank you so much. And let me point to something else that you said that I really think we also need to hear in this, is that even as Black people, we prefer oftentimes spaces of people who look lighter as authority. And so what I mean by that is we will bring in somebody who's white to tell a bunch of Black people how to fix Black problems, as opposed to listening to other Black people who look like us, because we don't value our own agency, and the colorism thing is real. You bring in a white man who has a PhD or whatever initials after his name, and somehow he is the expert, even if you have the exact same credentials of people right there. And that didn't just happen. Something about the trauma that we have experienced has led us to believe that they are superior, that we are inferior. And so the closer you are to that pigmentation, to that, or the skin color, then somehow you become more credible. You become more of an authority figure. I've watched this even as positions, and Dr. Taylor, I'm sure you've seen this too. You can have a group of educated Black people together, even if the white person even isn't near as educated, as soon as they step in the room, the power just shifts.
Yeah.
And I want us to kind of to dig into that, because that is part of our trauma. We have learned to acquiesce. We have learned to make ourselves less in those spaces. And it happens naturally. It's subconsciously or unconsciously, we just do that. And part of recognizing our trauma is recognizing, like you said, these triggers, that these things we just naturally do these things. And we don't realize that we're living out of our trauma and out of a place of healing.
Yeah, I think in addition to the spirit of the African being broken when the African was brought to this country, so was the African's mind. If I want to enslave you, the last thing I want you to discover is the truth that you have a mind. And so I have to get you to disown your interiority, the inner space, so that I can, as the oppressor, set up my rule in your inner being. And I can't do that if you have a strong mental guard at the gate that can prevent the psychological invasion into the inner territory of your being. And so the first thing that the oppressor has had to do is to convince us that we were hands. We were brought here to be filled hands, not minds, but hands. And I can't control your hands unless I destroy your mind first. And to prevent you from speaking your native language or worshiping in your native religion, I can't keep you ignorant of the fact that you have a mind and can think, because it will develop in what we have seen happen here in this panel discussion on this program. The greatest fear of the oppressor is that the oppressed will learn that they have a mind and will begin to think. And so the other thing is, it is in the favor of the oppressor. If the oppressed neglect getting the mental health that they need to strengthen the mind, once you discover it, you then have to provide health care for it. And you should not be naive to think that those who sought to break the mind in the first place will be very excited about helping you to repair the damage that has been perpetrated on the breakdown of the African mind. And so we need 3 doctors. We need a physical therapist. We need a spiritual therapist, some are called spiritual directors, and we need a mental therapist. Now, what would make it so unacceptable to have a mental therapist if you have a physical therapist? When your body gets sick, you're going to go to a doctor to help you get better physically. If your spirit gets sick, you ought to be able to find a spiritual director or spiritual counselor. But why is it that we're so afraid that when the mind gets sick, we don't want to go to the one that's been trained and have the specialization to help us to experience mental illness and mental growth? And I think that has been a trick that has been put on us by those who don't want us to get mental care and mental growth and mental development, because those who cannot think well cannot survive well. And any people that can think well, all of the arsenals of hell cannot hold them back. And I think that is the greatest fear that we see happening in our streets today, is people are realizing that there was a people who once were brainwashed into believing that they didn't have a mind. They have discovered that they have a mind, and it has become well developed, and it can no longer be easily misled or controlled. And thank God for that. So physical doctor, spiritual direction, and mental doctor, mental therapist. We need all 3 to be treated holistically.
That's super powerful, Doc. Thank you for that. Thank you. Were you going to say something, Dr. Murray? Go ahead.
Yeah, man, I agree with everybody. It's just as powerful, and again, I'm happy to be in learning, because this is just, I've had so many struggles, and let me just say, because they've all been mental, all been inward. And if I can say, by just another disclosure, I remember going into education, and Jerry would remember this, where we felt that mental block. They did a very good job on us before we went to these universities to teach, Dr. Taylor, and Dr. Curette co-signs with that, as they did a good job. If you don't know, Dr. Taylor and I were on the phone discussing our inadequacies as men of God, as Christian men. And I don't think it was a doubt But I remember the call before ACU, and of course, me going to Oklahoma Christian, to consider leaving at that time UCLA in Los Angeles to go to Oklahoma was very daunting for me, because I was already aware of the multiculturalism would be reduced. But here's what I wanted to say, Josh, so I won't extend it. I was thinking of C. Eric Lincoln and Frazier, who wrote of Blacks in the Reconstruction period, and they were coming back together as a people. There was this behavior that they acquiesced to. We would call it Jim Crow now, but they called it, here's one, natural docility. So the African American male is naturally docile, where he's always cowered down. And believe it or not, I was, even though I knew that and had that knowledge of that, being in those spaces, as Dr. Curette said, that docility does rise up, and you don't want to be too loud around certain female white faculty. They could very well violate my personal space, but at the same time, I was very aware that I don't want to be a threat. It was just a weird thing. And then not only natural docility, I forget the third one, but another one was instinctive servility. So instinctively, you're just here to be the butler, you're here to be the janitor, you're here to be, and so those things are so dominant that I cannot, as I speak, and we're talking about other things, man, as Dr. Owens was saying, I've really had to negotiate a lot of things within all of my years of academia. And I'm just now coming out of doing the work, so to speak, the self-work at Langston University. When I walk out of my office and I see a lot of Black kids, I just like, and I'm being honest with you, and that's after 14 years, and I'm not disrespecting Oklahoma Christian, and neither am I disparaging that experience, but no one can speak to what it's like to be in this skin. And I'm glad my brother mentioned it, just the very difference in our hue and in texture is real. That doesn't make he and I break out on one another. It almost, like they've done in America, it creates a fight within us that we don't even necessarily have. We just have it. And then I'm gonna say this without fear of shame. I'm bald because I tried to look more Eurocentric, had all those Jerry curls, carefree curls. Jerry knew me when I had a giant afro with a good lot of hair. But to be more acceptable, you know why? Let me tell you this, and I have to say it. I went to Pepperdine University after leaving Southwestern Christian College. Went back to Pepperdine. I was the only one in my class there, and they were full pay. Now, full pay at Pepperdine, now the denomination is 80,000 and above. So it was about 40 back then. And I had a college work study job. There were a lot of things that separated me, not only on a race level, but on a class level. And so just thinking about that, and then now I'm in the university. I'm just now, and I'll be 54 this year, just now coming out of the idea that look, I do matter on the university. I matter, and I'm valued, and there's so there is some credibility at being at an HBCU now, and I hate to say this, I had to almost leave a Christian school to find Jesus.
So let me piggyback off of that, because I want us to actually talk about this, since we're going to be, sending this to churches. So in a sense, so what about us as Black Christians who find ourselves in these predominantly white spaces of higher education, or white churches, specifically for myself and things like that? Like, these systems aren't intentionally designed for us to thrive, better yet to survive, and in some cases to speak out on your trauma becomes a threat to the way the institution is built to exist, right? And so what I mean by that is that if, like you said, like I have all this built up anger and frustration, but if I decide to express my anger, then I'm the angry Black man.
Yes.
But what's wrong with a Black person who happens to get angry? Anger is just an emotion. That's a natural emotion when things bother you. But I have told myself that I can't get angry, even when I am angry, which is actually me doing violence to myself, causing trauma. But then I have to go take that anger out on somebody else who doesn't deserve it, because I can't actually show any emotion. Like you said, I have to be the docile Black person. I had to learn these codes of, you have to learn to suck this up. Because if you actually explode in this place, you know, what are the ramifications for you? Now, on the other side of that, I got to watch my white counterparts without reservation. They could say things, they could do things. And I'm talking about both in church and my time in higher education, I got to watch it. But if I were to do that in this space, oh, it changes everything. And there even be times when I'm saying something and I get passionate, you know, as a preacher, you know, sometimes these just come out of you, you just start preaching and you don't even recognize it. And I would have to catch myself and I'd be like, oh. And then I changed my mannerism and it's like, why did I do that? Nobody had to even tell me to do that. I just did it. Because I could recognize that I was somehow getting to a point where I could be seen in an unfavorable light because of who I am. And so how do we help Black Christians who are in these spaces to be healthy in these spaces, to be whole in these spaces, and not necessarily feel like you have to just get along and to continue to commit violence against yourself? Because in one way or another, we're going to probably find ourselves, more than likely, the majority of us will find ourselves in a space such as this.
For me, I've been here for 17 years at Abilene Christian University. And I came here as a free man. And I was able to see myself as being free because I never saw myself getting employment at a white institution. My employer is divine. I had work before I came to ACU that was assigned to me by God. And if there ever comes a time when I leave ACU, I will carry my work with me. People have control over your occupation, but they can't touch your vocation. And so the only way that I've been able to survive in a white space is to see myself as being completely free in the God who is the God of freedom and liberation. And so I don't accommodate myself to the institution. The institution has to accommodate the growth and the expansion that God is giving to me as a human being. And when the institution cannot accommodate my growth and development as a human person, then that is my time to move to a different context. But if I get angry, if I get upset about something, I address it right then and there. I don't hold it in. I don't let it slide. I confront in the most redemptive way possible. But I have carried myself in that way here, and I have come to be known by that. And I know that there may be individuals who are connected with the institution that may resent my very presence, but I'm not here for you. I'm not in this world primarily for you. I'm here to help you and to love you, but I'm here for God because He gave me the right to be born. And so you have to have that kind of commitment to your freedom, regardless of whether you're operating in a white context or a Black context. Because I am anti-oppression, whether it comes in the form of whiteness or in the form of Blackness. So whatever context I'm in, I have to be the person God has called me to be, because that is my divine employer and the one that I have to give an account to for the life that I've lived when I return it back to him, or when he calls it back unto himself. So that's just my 10 cents worth in how I've survived here for 17 years. I didn't ask to come here, and I'm not asking to stay here. I'm just asking to be wherever it is God decides he wants me to be.
Wow. I better say something, because Jerry just voiced the latter. The suit got too small for me where I was. And it was already robbing my personhood. And I've already put up with the idea of the cloak of Christianity, but not necessarily the full appeal to me as a person. So I had to take me back. And like Jerry said, the changes and the things that I wanted to see, sometimes things are slow, but the only time when I was heard was when I did riot. And so they seem to reinforce, and this is white administration in all Christian schools, seem to reinforce this big whip in terms of, we're going to offer you this position. And I'm saying this respectfully. And I've said it to administration. The only time I've given voice is, see, when you're not asked to leave and you leave on your own recognizances, then it allows an administration to call you back in after all of those years and say, well, what is it? And they sincerely say, what is it, knowing the answer. I'm being explicit with this right now, because that's kind of what happened to me. Now, I've been telling you for 15 years, and you've been seeing it for 15 years. Anytime something happens on campus, let's ask the Black man. So a lot of times we're only given some type of voice when there is a problem. And we're given this voice. My point for saying this is, I appreciate Jerry saying that. With all due respect, our institutions want to do well. Our church institutions want to do well, but they don't do well in talking about race and being completely honest and explicit about how they feel about it. And so what happens is they'll try to answer these, I'm just trying to be real good here, these diversity initiatives that speak to only numbers and not necessarily humanizing another person. And so what they do is they'll get the numbers and so on and so forth. And what is happening now to institutions is that those types of things backfire, especially our Christian institutions, when you can't find Black faculty, but they're out there. They just may not look like you want them to look in the package that you need to have at your particular institution. So I'm saying this because I've had to grab myself back. And for some Black faculty in certain places, it may mean leaving because we have a God who sanctions us and not necessarily these universities.
I really appreciate this conversation for so many reasons. And I think, what I'm recognizing is that we're all just in really different parts of our process in this too. And I'm recognizing that I'm still growing into being in these white spaces and organizations, colleges, and doing the acts of healing as I'm in those spaces. I recognize that something that's been really important is acknowledging like why do I go silent? Why do I suppress my own voice? Why do I get small? It is, to not fit those stereotypes that are so harmful to us. It is also to stay safe. And I think whenever we're talking about trauma, we have to talk about what are all the ways that we, all the things that we do to stay safe, and to not tempt the powerful other to perpetuate violence on us again. And so this has been part of my process, is naming like, why in this moment am I doing the thing right now? Why am I going quiet? Why am I feeling intimidated? Why am I feeling like my voice in my life doesn't matter right now? And being able to talk about that with myself, why is this happening? And then trying to choose to do different anyway, which I am imperfect. And I want to go ahead and just say that right now. I stayed in a system, in a educational system in Texas for 2 years, where I was actively being racially abused, where there were acts of violence on my psyche. And part of that was while I was pregnant with my second child as well, which I continue to hold resentment for, if I'm going to be honest, towards, the white ideologies that made that happen. And so after those 2 years, and trying to name again my experience and what happened for me, it put me into a crossroads to really sit with, am I going to continue to allow whiteness to rule, and whiteness to tell me what my value and worth is, or am I going to allow God to do that? And so my journey has been imperfect, as I've said, but it really has been this space of trying to reconcile my relationship with God, because I do recognize that I have served the idol of white supremacy, as Dr. Taylor was talking about, and that I have ingested that poison and I have lived as if it is the greatest thing I've ever drank before. And I also have had to really re-see myself through God's gaze, which has been so difficult, because, we talk about trauma, and also contributes to self-hatred, not knowing how to love yourself, because if you loved yourself, then things would be really different, and so I've really had to try and figure out, like, God's calling me his beloved, but I don't feel that way. I don't experience that in any kind of way. And so I am still in the process of trying to figure out, how does God see me, and how do I then have to live my life because I know how he sees me? And so, and I just think that the other part, again, as I'm developing, as I'm recognizing that I'm having to move from a narrative that is in my lived experience, a narrative of oppression, to a narrative of resiliency and strength and love and peace, and something that is outside of me. And I have not figured that out completely, but I'm recognizing every day I have a choice to live in a different narrative if I try to do that, if I'm intentional about it, and if I practice that. Because sometimes, the muscle it's not working, it's not strong. And so I'm still trying to exercise that. How do I live out an awareness of the power that I do hold, of the one that lives inside of me? And I would also, the last thing is that part of this journey and what's helping me to become who I'm becoming, I don't know what that is, but I know that it is definitely more grounded in God and grounded in knowing my worth and value, that I have 2 little girls that are watching me right now. And it brings tears to my eyes to understand that there are ways that if I'm unintentional and if I'm not well in myself, that I am transmitting trauma to them actively and unapologetically. And so I must actively question. I must actively be curious about my own experience. I must actively decolonize my mind. I must actively get the stuff out of my body that is not mine to own and was never meant for me, because I have two girls that are watching me. They're watching how I look at my body. They're watching me as I struggle with the standards of beauty, and recognizing that I've tried to live a white, blonde-haired, blue-eyed woman's life when that is not the body or the hair or the eyes that I've been given. And so, and there's so many other ways, just my womanhood, in the face of masculinity, and especially white, heterosexual, cisgender masculinity, just recognizing that, that I have deferred all my life to that power, and that I have to choose every single day to know my own power, be grounded in that, and to speak, even when I'm scared, and to be strong even when I feel weak, and because my kids are watching. And I need to bring up girls who who know their worth, who know who they are in God, and also know who they are to the society, because they are game changers, those two, and I don't ever want to hinder them.
Boy,
Lord have mercy.
Doc, you sure you was gonna get this away, Lord? Like, boy, my. The heavens opened up. Thank you, honestly. I can't say it enough. Honestly, thank you for saying that. We needed to hear that, but we as a community need to hear that. What you shared, oh man, just so, honestly, there aren't words. Thank you, Candy, honestly. Thank you for the work that you're doing professionally, vocationally, and the deep work that you're doing personally. Oh man, thank you. Brother Alvin, yeah, just, yeah.
So I want to be respectful of time as well. If we don't have time, I don't have to answer this question.
Well, I mean, it's up to you. I mean, we have time, so this will be the last part. So I was just
okay. So this is what I will say. I agree with everything. This has been therapeutic for me, and I think we've been using the term institution, rightfully so. It's the institution of slavery, right? And so when we think about institutionalization, most of us think about the prison system. And if you do any work or any research around that, people who become institutionalized, they become dependent upon the institution to provide. And that's everything from food to when you wake up, to when you go to bed, to how you think of yourself. They determine everything that you do, right? And sometimes in terms of what that's doing to your own psychology about who you are and what your value is, you don't even understand that that's another process that's taking place, right? Because what they're really telling you is that you're not capable enough to make life decisions for yourself. And so you need me to tell you when to eat, what to eat, when to go outside, when to go to bed, when to wake up. And I'll go a step further. Even in the institution of formal education, we're told when to show up to class. We're told how long class will last. We're told what we need to study to pass a test. Most of those tests are Eurocentric. Okay, we're told what we need to know to show ourselves as capable intellectuals, right? Which comes from the canon of Eurocentric literature, right, and ideologies. And so most of us, we are being institutionalized to prove ourselves to our white masters. And on a conscious level, we don't know that that's what's happening, but subconsciously, as what's been stated, we are dependent upon white systems to accredit us, whether it's with a degree or a job, then to approve us so that we can maintain said job. And so I think what I've come to understand is that we have to go through a process of deinstitutionalization. Whereas what Candy said, what Dr. Murray said, what Dr. Taylor said, instead of making white institutions our God, and ensuring that we know everything that APA has to say about citing, or that we can cite every theorist that is white, because that's what these white spaces have taught us, that this is what we need to show or broadcast to prove ourselves as worthy. We really need to take that false God and tear him or her down. And we need to come to know the true God who created us.
Yes.
Because that's the only way that we will know who we truly are.
Yeah.
That's the only way that we will be able to love who we truly are. And it's the only way we'll be able to go into work like my dad taught me. You go into work, son, every day like it's your last day. You give it your all like it's your last day, but you need to know that at any day, if they get rid of you, you can pack your stuff up and you can walk out with your head high. Yeah. Because you know who you are and you believe in what you bring to the table. So they're not your source. God is, and he will provide, because you have something valuable to give. And it's not because you gave it to yourself, but he gave it to you, and you have been responsible enough to nurture it.
Yes, sir.
And I'm learning that, because when we don't see ourselves that way, we walk on eggshells every single day, and it's killing us.
Right.
Yes.
It's killing us, because there's no way that we can fully function when we are so fixated on pleasing a human being,
right,
who in many instances, they don't want to know the real us in the first place.
Mm.
And so again, I thank you all for being so transparent, but I do think that we have to deinstitutionalize ourselves, because we've really undergone a deep institutionalization process.
Yes, honestly, I want to thank you all for this conversation. Honestly, it's been a blessing just to be on this conversation with you all. I can't say it enough. It has done something to my spirit, to my soul, in such a meaningful and impactful way. And so as we get ready to close, I want to say just one thing to kind of tie this together before I give it to Dr. Taylor to close us out. In the last about 4.5, 5 years, like my sister Candy has said, I've been going through a similar process, and like all of you has mentioned. And I remember having that breakdown moment where in my mind, it was like, if I'm just good enough, if I just make X amount of money, if I do whatever these traditional standards are, that I'll be received and I'll be treated as an equal. And it didn't come the way I thought it was going to come. And I hit the wall. And I mean, when I say I hit it hard. It took a toll on me physically. It took a toll on my relationship with my wife. It took a toll on my job performance. And it was the institution that I was trying so hard to perform in that was actually killing me. But I was willing to give it all for the institution, thinking that if I just did more, they would see me and they would respond in kind. Only to realize that was never going to happen. And I say that, and I know that some of you have those similar experiences. The institution is not going to do that for you. And what I had to realize was that they can't give me something that I'm not willing to give to myself. The institution is designed to get what it wants out of you, not to give you what you want out of it. That's the relationship of the institution. And I had to come to grips with that. In churches, as much as I love working in a church, it's still an institution. And it will suck you dry. The church can kill you, especially if you work in one. It will applaud you for all the busy work that you do and watch you destroy yourself. And then look at you and say, well, why didn't you take care of yourself? All the while, we wanted all of you. And so I had to learn boundaries. I had to learn self-care. I had to learn to say no and be okay with that. I even had to learn to negotiate a contract that was for me and that wasn't just general, that if you want me to be the minister, this is what I need for me personally, for myself. And I had to learn to do all that. But here's the reason why I wanted to bring all that up, because this is what I found, and what Doc said has helped me so much because he said the very same thing to me long ago, that there was a difference between your vocation and your occupation. But once I experienced freedom, I recognized that I lived a little different. The way I navigated my life and my work situation has vastly changed. I love what I do, but if tomorrow they tell me we no longer need your services, I'm good because I know who I am. I know what I bring to the table. Even when I have to have conversations about salary, you're not just going to pay me whatever. This is what I know I'm working. If you can't match it, that's fine. I can walk away from the table. I'm bringing something to the table of value. And I believe in myself. I believe in my abilities because I know what God has placed in me. And so I navigate the world now from a place that I didn't know I could. I'm no longer fearful of being me. But that process required me to actually go to counseling. It required me to do some therapy. Like it required me to take that honest look in the mirror of why I was so just destined to live a certain way that I had been trained and conditioned to live, that I didn't even recognize all of it. I didn't even recognize all the aspects of it. And so I will say the blessing out of all of that, not only for the personal freedom that I've experienced, but as a minister working full-time in a church setting, is to help other Black people in the congregations that I'm in these diverse spaces and saying, look, this institution isn't always going to be kind to you. We're going to work to change it, to reform it, to help it accommodate your needs and not ask you just to assimilate. But at the same time, you have to do your own process of self-healing.
That's right.
And the reason that's important is because if you're not whole and you have, and I'm saying this from personal experience, when you have open space, like Doc said, in your interior, don't be surprised that the oppressor tries to fill it with something that you didn't want there.
Right.
So every time I made space in my life for something, the oppressor was like, we'll figure out something to do with that space. And sometimes you thought what they were doing was giving you something that you wanted, but they were just taking advantage of you. And we couldn't even see it because I wanted to appease the institution, this white system, this system of white supremacy. And I didn't know that I had my personal agency to say, no, I really don't want that. I'm okay doing this. Or how about we got to put up this committee, or like what Dr. Murray said was so critical because he said, they come get you when there's a problem. Well, I'm not coming anymore to the problem. But we need you to come to the problem. Well, that's not in my job description to come to the problem. So if you want me to come to the problem, then we need to talk about you compensating me for dealing with the problem. Or let's talk about whether I want to do this or not. But if you don't have that level of freedom, if you don't have that level of self, then you feel obligated to do everything they ask you, even if it's detrimental to you. You don't believe that you can say no. You don't believe you have other options. And so I think this conversation is so important is because not only are we experiencing trauma that dominant culture puts on us as Black people in this country, but our lack of personal agency and the fact that we have been so fractured and so disjointed and disconnected that we have internalized that this is just how we're supposed to live and this is how we're supposed to navigate this life. And so I'm grateful for these final comments that everybody has shared, because what we have let people know is that that doesn't have to be normative. You can experience freedom.
Yes.
It's work. And like Dr. Murray said, you might have to go to a different place. You might have to, change your job place. That might be it. But I'm sure you would say that there's no greater cost. Like if it's worth it, even if you have to take a pay cut, your mental health is worth it. It's worth making a change that you're not destroying yourself for a couple extra dollars just to be seen in white spaces, or to be somebody who just somehow is affirmed by a system that really doesn't want you there and it's not willing to accommodate you. Sacrificing yourself is not worth it. But the reinforced message is that it is. And so I want us to do for our personal selves, obviously, and I'm grateful that we're all on this journey of doing better. But I want to say this to our churches, the people who are going to be viewing this, that it's not worth it. It's not to sacrifice yourself to just be seen as somebody who gets along in white society and white culture. It's more detrimental to you. You're tearing yourself up. You're destroying your body, your spirit, your soul, and your mind. And the institutions that we are part of will take everything from you if you give it. And they won't apologize for it. So I say that we can do better. Let's not be so against getting the mental help that we need. And I will say this last thing before I turn to Dr. Taylor for ministers, because I think it needs to be said. There's a vast difference between pastoral care and clinical work.
Yes.
And so for us as ministers, as pastors, stay in your lane. Don't try to do clinical work, but you need to have a referral list of good clinicians. And I'm going to say even more, that as clinicians, that as pastors who are having a referral list for clinicians, don't send your people to anybody you have not checked out first.
Right.
You need to go meet with them, talk to them, understand that they are on the same page you are before you refer people to them. But I think we can do better of building a network of Black and brown clinicians who can help us deal with what we're going through, so we can be healthier, whole individuals who are free from the system of white supremacy, even though we live in a nation that dominates us. So with that, Doc, I want to thank you for this conversation, but I'll turn it over to you for your final comments.
Wow. All I can say is wow. I tell you, this has been beyond marvelous and beyond fantastic. I want to thank each of you for sharing in a very courageous fashion, because it is only when we hang out with the one who is the I am that we come to know, and that I come to know who I am. And when you come to know who you are, you're willing to lose everything, because the stuff that you think you got, it ain't nothing, no how. But everything that we need is in the one who is the great I am. And we can be faithful and loyal to him, even to the point of death, because we're living in a time now where not only are we facing the possibility of the loss of monetary resources, but there are people who have given themselves to thinking about using violence as a way to silence those who have discovered who they are in God. And as it has been the case in the history of the world, all truth tellers become a threat to the system of empire. And if you cannot be bought or bribed, then you are assassinated. And so that takes it to a whole nother level. So when you're in the creator of life, you look to him as the sustainer of life, even if you have to lay down your life for the sake of truth-telling and living as a person with integrity in harmony with the principles of a kingdom that is not of this world. So that having been said, we leave the seeds that we have planted, hopefully in good soil, and we will look to the Lord of the harvest to give the increase. That having been said, we'll ask Brother Curette if he would bless us in our closing prayer as we exit this virtual space.
Thank you all. Let us bow. Father God, we just come to you at this time with humble hearts, with thanksgiving. We thank you for bringing us together at this time to discuss treating trauma. God, we know you didn't give us a mind or a heart of fear. We know that all the toxicity that we experience, God, you didn't put that there to harm us. But God has been allowed, it's been allowed to happen. And I think for us, we need to realize that you are the only true source of power who can help heal us.
Yes, yes.
The thing that serves as our greatest pain, oftentimes it's the very thing that grows us or draws us closer to you. And so God, I just pray for everyone who's listening, regardless of what you're going through, what we're going through. God, just help us to see that we need to use the pain and our struggles to draw closer to you and to have a true relationship with you and not treat you as someone who we just call on when it's convenient or comfortable or when we are in dire need, but somebody who we truly integrate into our lives. We pray for our communities, not just communities of color, God, but just all of our communities. We pray for our country, pray for our families, pray for our hearts and our minds. Just continue to be with us, strengthen us, and keep us. It's in Jesus' name we pray and ask it all. Amen.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. Thank you, Dr. Taylor, for leading us in that discussion tonight. I know you were blessed just like I was, and we hope and pray that this conversation tonight has helped you to spark some imagination about some conversations that can take place where you are, in your home and in your city and even in your congregation, about how we respond and how we treat the trauma that we have experienced as a result of all that we have seen, especially over the last few days. Again, thank you, Dr. Taylor. Thank you to every person who participated in tonight's discussion for a job well done. I know we were all blessed tonight. Listen, before we let you go, we want to remind you of a couple of things. First of all, Dr. Michael Waters, who was a national activist, national voice for civil rights in America, professor as well, has recently completed a book entitled For Beautiful Black Boys Who Believe in a Better World. This book is scheduled to be released in September, and it's designed to be a tool that you as parents can use to have a conversation with your young black sons about interaction with police and the violence that they've experienced and the things that they've experienced and the trauma that they've seen. And so we encourage you to go now. We encourage you to take advantage of that book. You can go to, I believe, Amazon and some of the other sites, and you can begin to order that book now. It's available for pre-order. But the reason where we're wanting you to make sure that you take advantage of this opportunity is because part of the proceeds of this book and its sales will go to support the Botham Jean Foundation. We remember Botham. He was our brother departed whose life was taken not long ago at the hands of an off-duty police officer. A foundation was established in his honor and in his name, and part of these proceeds will go to support that foundation. And so we want you to search for that book again. It's For Beautiful Black Boys Who Believe in a Better World, written by Dr. Michael Waters. Go now, and we want you to find that book. Also, we encourage every member of the Dallas area Churches of Christ in particular. If you have not already, we encourage you to support this effort and this work via Cash App. Typically, we have this conference and revival in-house, and we receive an offering to help support the endeavors and the work of the conference. We're not doing that this year, but we invite you, if you would like to support this effort, to go to the Cash App, and we want you to give right now to the DAPCL Justice Conference. Go to Cash App and search the $DAPCL. Do that now. Go to your tablet, go to your phone, go to your device, and we want you to do that now, particularly if you are a member of the Dallas area Churches of Christ. We want you to do that now. All right, so before we do anything, let's go to God in prayer. Lord, listen, you've been our dwelling place throughout all generations, and from everlasting to everlasting, you're God. Father, we thank you for tonight and for this opportunity and for this discussion and for every person who's participated therein. We pray that the words tonight have fallen on good ears who are listening, and ears who have taken in what you have shared with us through the minds of your servants tonight. Father, as we've discussed treating the trauma, Lord, we ask that you help us in a very special way to acknowledge the hurts and the pains and the ills that we experience, Father, but not to only acknowledge them, Father, but find a way through your word and through your presence to heal those ills and to heal those hurts, Father. Lord, we ask that you work within us, work within our hearts to be the kinds of people that you would have us to be, to love one another more, to care for one another more, to be kindly affectionate toward one another, Father, to not tolerate hate and to not tolerate injustice, Father, but to live up to the ideals that you have established for us in your word, to be a loving people who acknowledge you and lift you up. Do that for us, Father, and that'll be enough. In the name of your Son, Jesus, we pray. Amen. So with that said, we're going to wrap it up, but we encourage you to join us tomorrow night. Minister Carl Sherman, who is also Texas House Representative, he's going to come and he's going to lead us in tomorrow night's discussion entitled Criminal Justice and the Culture of Policing in America. Listen, you don't want to miss it. Minister Sherman has done a tremendous job locally and statewide in efforts to reform the criminal justice system as well as the prison system, and we are excited to hear what he and those that he's invited to speak on tomorrow night have to say. So we invite you to come back tomorrow night. See you at 7 o'clock. God bless.